My brother used me as a free babysitter, so I showed him the price. I never thought a 2 in the morning phone call would change my life forever. The phone rang insistently until I answered, still drowsy. It was Marcus, my older brother, and his voice was loaded with desperation. "Sarah, I need your help." "I have no one else." He spoke quickly, almost whispering. "It's about Emma and Jake. I need you to take care of them for a few weeks, just until I sort some things out." I sat up in bed, trying to process what he was saying. Marcus had always been the problematic brother, but in recent years he had distanced himself even more from the family. I barely saw the children, only during sporadic holidays. "Marcus, it's 2 in the morning. What kind of problem do you have that can't wait until tomorrow?" Crystal said if the kids don't leave the house, she's leaving. "Sarah, I love this woman. She's different from the others, but she can't handle small children. It's temporary, I swear." My heart tightened. Crystal was the new girlfriend, a woman I had met only once at a family barbecue. She had been cold with the children, barely looking at them, but I never imagined it would reach the point of giving an ultimatum. "Marcus, you can't just abandon your children because of a woman. It's not abandonment," he practically shouted, then lowered his voice again. "It's just temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month, just until I get a bigger apartment, a place where Crystal feels more comfortable." I wanted to say no. Every fiber of my being screamed to refuse. I had just graduated as a nurse, was starting my career, trying to build my own life. But when I thought of Emma, only 5 years old, and Jake with his 3 years, my heart softened. Where will they sleep? My apartment only has 1 bedroom. You'll figure it out. You always do. The manipulation in his voice was clear. Family doesn't abandon family, Sarah. You know that. 3 hours later, Marcus was at my door with 2 enormous suitcases and a colorful folder. The children were in the car, still in pajamas with sleepy and confused eyes. Emma was holding a worn teddy bear while Jake sucked his thumb. "Here's everything you need to know," Marcus said, handing me the folder. "Feeding schedules, bath routines, what shows they can watch. Emma can't eat chocolate after 4 in the afternoon, or she gets hyperactive. Jake still wears diapers at night." I opened the folder and my heart sank. It wasn't just instructions. It was a military schedule. Rigid timetables for everything, from when to wake up to when to sleep. A list of forbidden foods that took up an entire page. Rules about visits, about outings, about practically everything. "Marcus, this looks more like a work contract than instructions for taking care of children. This is how things work, Sarah. Children need structure." He was already heading for the door. "Oh, and cancel any commitments you have for the next weekends. The children can't stay with strangers." "Wait, what do you mean by weekends? I thought this was just during the week while you work." Marcus stopped at the door without turning around. "Crystal and I need time together. Relationships need care. Sarah, you'll understand when you find someone." And then he left, leaving 2 confused and scared children in my living room. Emma looked at me with big eyes and asked, "Where did Daddy go? When is he coming back?" I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because a part of me already suspected that Marcus had no intention of coming back as soon as he had promised. The first 2 weeks were a hell I wasn't prepared to face. Emma and Jake arrived with clothes that smelled of mold and old food, as if they hadn't bathed in days. When I finally managed to get them in the shower, I was shocked by what I saw. Emma was visibly thinner than I remembered, her ribs protruding under pale skin. Jake seemed lost, looking around my apartment as if he were on an alien planet. But what worried me most were the marks. Small bruises on Emma's arms, some already yellowed, others still purple. When I asked about them, she lowered her eyes and mumbled, "I fell down the stairs. Daddy said I'm clumsy." Jake practically didn't speak. At 3 years old, he should be chattering nonstop, asking questions about everything. Instead, he would shrink every time I raised my voice, even if it was just to call him for dinner. On the first night, Emma cried for 2 straight hours. I tried everything, stories, songs, even let her watch television in my bed. Nothing worked. "I want to go home," she sobbed. "I want my daddy. He'll be back soon, sweetheart. He just needed to sort out some things." But when I called Marcus the next day, the number he had left was disconnected. I tried the old number I had saved, also out of service. I sent messages on Facebook, emails, even tried calling some mutual acquaintances. Nothing. That's when I discovered the first lie. Emma should be in preschool, but when I called to confirm the schedule, the secretary told me she had never been enrolled. Jake also wasn't in any little school or daycare. "What do you mean they're not enrolled?" I asked Emma during breakfast. "Daddy said school is a waste of time. That Crystal will teach us at home. She played with the cereal in the milk, clearly uncomfortable. But Crystal doesn't like it when we ask questions. My blood froze. Crystal lives with you? Emma nodded, still looking at her plate. She sleeps in Daddy's room. She screams a lot. She said children make too much noise and we need to learn to be quiet. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson, my 70-year-old neighbor, knocked on my door with a plate of cookies. "Dear, excuse me for intruding, but are these your brother's children?" She looked at Emma and Jake, who were watching cartoons on television. "I saw them a few times when I visited you, but they seem different." "Different how?" Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. "Thinner and scared. The girl greeted me yesterday in the hallway, but when I smiled back, she hid behind you as if she expected to be scolded." This observation hit me like a punch in the stomach. It was true. The children behaved as if they were constantly expecting punishment for something. "Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you a strange question? Did you by any chance see my brother leaving here in the early morning about 2 weeks ago?" She frowned, thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, yes, I did. He left with a blonde woman carrying suitcases. It was quite late, maybe 3 in the morning. I thought it was strange, because the children weren't with them. My world collapsed. Marcus hadn't left the next morning as I thought. He had fled in the dead of night, leaving the children sleeping on my couch, without even saying goodbye to them. That night, after Emma and Jake finally fell asleep, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried. They weren't tears of sadness. They were of pure rage. How could someone abandon their own children? How had I been so naive as to believe he would come back? But more than that, I was terrified. Because looking at those 2 traumatized children, I knew there was no going back. They were my responsibility now, whether I wanted it or not. The next morning, I called the nearest pediatric clinic and made emergency appointments for Emma and Jake. Dr. Martinez, a gentle man in his 50s, examined the children with meticulous care. "When was their last appointment?" he asked, flipping through the empty files. I'm not sure. I'm their aunt. I'm taking care of them temporarily." Dr. Martinez nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He measured and weighed the children, did basic exams, and then asked to speak with me privately. "Ms. Sarah, I need to be direct with you. These children are severely malnourished. Emma should weigh at least 15 kilos for her age. She has 12. Jake should be speaking in complete sentences, but his vocabulary is that of a 2-year-old child." My heart raced. "You mean they're sick?" "Not exactly sick, but definitely neglected. The bruises on Emma. She told me she fell down the stairs 3 times this month. It's possible, but statistically unlikely." He paused. "Can I ask about the family situation?" I told him everything. About Marcus disappearing. About Crystal. About the lies. Dr. Martinez listened in silence, taking notes. "I recommend you seek a psychological evaluation for both. And I need to be honest. If I suspect ongoing abuse, I'm required by law to report to social services." "Do you think they were abused?" "I think they were neglected, which is a form of abuse. The question is, how severe was this negligence?" That night, while bathing Jake, he said his first complete sentence since he arrived. "Sarah, are you going away too?" My heart broke. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going away. Daddy said he was coming back. Mommy said that too." Jake played with a rubber duck, avoiding my gaze. "They always say they're coming back." "What mommy, Jake? Do you remember your mommy?" He nodded. "Mommy Jenny. She had hair like Emma's. Daddy said she went away because she didn't like us." "Jennifer, Marcus's ex-wife. I knew they had divorced when Emma was little, but Marcus always said Jennifer had abandoned the family." Now I wondered how much of that story was true. Emma appeared at the bathroom door holding her teddy bear. "Sarah, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, sweetheart." She approached and whispered in my ear. "Daddy said not to tell about the women who visited our house at night. He said it's an adult secret." My blood froze. "What women, Emma?" "Different women. They made noise in Daddy's room. Crystal got angry and screamed at them. Once she screamed at me and Jake, said we were too noisy and nobody wanted us. That night after the children slept, I sat at my computer and started researching. I looked for Jennifer, Marcus's ex-wife. It took a few hours, but I finally found a Facebook profile. Jennifer Collins, now Jennifer Williams. Married again, living 2 hours away. In the photos, she looked happy, but there was something in her eyes that I recognized. The same sadness I saw in Emma's eyes. I took a deep breath and sent a message. "Hi, Jennifer. I'm Sarah, Marcus's sister. I need to talk to you about Emma and Jake. It's urgent." The response came 20 minutes later. My God, Sarah, I've been looking for them for 2 years. Where are they? And that's how I discovered the most devastating truth of all. Jennifer hadn't abandoned her children. Marcus had fled with them in the dead of night, constantly changing addresses so she couldn't find them. She had spent thousands of dollars on lawyers and private investigators, trying to get her daughter back. From that moment, I knew I was dealing with something much bigger and more dangerous than simple negligence. Marcus wasn't just an irresponsible father. He was a manipulator who used his own children as pawns in his sick games. I met with Jennifer at a coffee shop downtown 2 days later. She arrived with a thick folder under her arm and red eyes from crying so much. When she saw the photos of Emma and Jake on my phone, she broke down. "My baby," she whispered, touching the screen where Emma smiled timidly. "She's so thin. What did he do to them?" Jennifer told me a story that made my stomach turn. Marcus had been controlling and manipulative from the beginning of the marriage. He isolated Jennifer from family and friends, controlled every penny she spent, and gradually began using the children as weapons against her. Whenever I tried to leave or do something for myself, he threatened to take Emma away from me. He said I was a terrible mother, that no judge would give me custody. Jennifer wiped her eyes with a napkin. When Jake was born, it got worse. He started bringing other women home saying I didn't satisfy him anymore. "And you didn't try to take the children?" "I tried. One night, I packed the bags and put Emma in the car. But Marcus found me before I could leave the garage. He dragged me back into the house and locked me in the room for 3 days, saying that if I tried to leave again, he would make Emma and Jake disappear where I would never find them." The story got even darker. Marcus eventually kicked Jennifer out of the house, but kept the children. He moved constantly, always one step ahead of the investigators she hired. And every time she seemed to be getting close, he disappeared again. The last time I saw my children was 2 years ago. Emma was 3 years old, Jake only 1. They probably don't even remember me. "Emma remembers," I said softly. "She mentioned Mommy Jenny yesterday." Jennifer started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. That afternoon, while Jennifer got reacquainted with her children, a moment both beautiful and heartbreaking, Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door with a serious expression. "Sarah, dear, I need to show you something." She took me to her apartment and showed me a shoebox full of photographs. I know this might seem like I'm meddling, but I was worried about those children for months. Whenever I saw them, they seemed haunted. Mrs. Henderson flipped through the photos. I documented everything I saw. The images were devastating. Emma and Jake alone in the yard for hours, wearing dirty and ill-fitting clothes. Trash accumulated at the door of the house where they lived. Different cars arriving at night, unknown men coming and going. And in one particularly disturbing photo, Emma consoling Jake, who was crying in the middle of the street while screams came from the house. "Why didn't you call the police?" I asked. "I tried once." But when the social worker showed up, Marcus was there, well-dressed, the house was clean, and the children were well-behaved. He said I was a meddling neighbor with mental problems. Mrs. Henderson sighed. After that, he moved. I thought I would never see those children again. When was this? 6 months ago. He came back 2 months ago with a blonde woman, this Crystal you mentioned. But this time it was different. The children seemed even more scared, and I heard constant fights. Mrs. Henderson handed me the box. "Take this. If you're going to fight for these children, you'll need all the evidence possible." That night, after Jennifer left promising to return the next day with her lawyer, I sat with Emma on her bed. "Emma, can I ask some questions about when you lived with Daddy?" She nodded, hugging her teddy bear tighter. "Do you remember staying home alone with Jake?" "Sometimes. Daddy went out with Crystal or with other women. He said I was big enough to take care of Jake." Emma spoke quietly, as if telling a secret. "But I was scared. Jake cried a lot, and I didn't know how to make him stop." "At what age did this start?" "When I was 4 years old. Daddy said that if I told anyone, they would take us to a place where bad children go." My heart broke. A 4-year-old child being forced to care for a baby, threatened to keep secrets, traumatized by constant abandonment. And I had thought Marcus was just irresponsible. "Emma, you know that none of this was your fault, right?" She looked at me with big, confused eyes. "But Daddy said I was too noisy. That's why the women didn't like us." That night, I made a decision. No matter what it cost, these children would never go back to Marcus, even if it meant fighting the system, lying, or breaking laws. Some things are more important than rules. I hired a private investigator the next day. Detective Williams was a serious man in his 40s, a former police officer who now specialized in family custody cases. When I showed him Mrs. Henderson's photos and told the complete story, he nodded gravely. I've seen cases like this before. Men who use children as bargaining chips, who neglect them but refuse to give up custody for pure control. He took notes while speaking. The problem is that the legal system favors biological parents, even when they're clearly inadequate. How long do you think it will take to find Marcus? Not long. Men like him leave trails, especially when they're spending money they don't have. Detective Williams closed his notepad. But I need to warn you, when we find him, things could get ugly. Men like Marcus don't like losing control. He was right. In less than a week, Detective Williams called me with news. I found your brother. He's in Las Vegas, staying at the Bellagio with this crystal. And Sarah, you need to sit down to hear this. Marcus wasn't just solving financial problems. He was living like a king, spending money on gambling, expensive restaurants, and shows. His social media showed a life of luxury. Photos in casinos, at five-star hotel poolsides, at restaurants that cost more in one night than I earned in a week. How is he paying for all this? I asked. That's the interesting part. He's collecting government benefits as a struggling single father. Food assistance, subsidized housing, pension for children in need, all based on the lie that he's taking care of 2 small children alone. My blood boiled. Marcus was literally profiting from abandoning his own children. There's more, Detective Williams continued. He's done this before. 2 years ago, he had another child with an ex-girlfriend named Rebecca. When the baby was born, Marcus disappeared. The child is now being raised by the paternal grandparents, and Rebecca is suing Marcus for child support. How many children does he have? At least 3 that I could document. There could be more. That night, I called Rebecca. She told me a terribly familiar story. Marcus promising change, then disappearing when the reality of parenthood became inconvenient. He said he wanted a family, Rebecca cried on the phone. Said he was ready to settle down. But when our son was born, he started complaining that the baby cried too much, was too expensive, that it was ruining his relationship with a new girlfriend. Did he just disappear? Worse. He took all the baby shower gifts, the money my family had given to help, even the stroller and crib. He left my son with nothing and disappeared in the dead of night. Every story I heard painted a darker picture. Marcus wasn't just a negligent father. He was a predator who used relationships and children as sources of income. He manipulated women into getting pregnant, collected money and gifts, and then disappeared when responsibility became inconvenient. But the most shocking discovery came when Detective Williams showed me the bank accounts he had managed to trace. Sarah, your brother moved more than $50,000 in the last 6 months. Fraudulent benefits, money borrowed from women he was dating, even a loan he got using Emma as a dependent. He's literally selling his own children, I whispered. Essentially, yes. And there's more. Crystal isn't just a passive girlfriend in all this. She's an accomplice. She helped him create false identities to get more benefits. And there's evidence that she's pressuring Marcus to get rid of the children permanently. What do you mean by get rid of? Detective Williams showed me screenshots of conversations he had obtained, messages between Marcus and Crystal discussing how to make Sarah assume total responsibility while they continued collecting benefits. They're planning to permanently abandon the children with you? I asked, incredulous. It seems so. And Sarah, they know you have the children. Marcus hired someone to track you. He's coming back to town, not to get the children, but to force you to assume legal custody while he maintains parental rights and benefits. That night, I changed all the locks on my apartment and installed security cameras, because I knew the real battle was just beginning. Marcus showed up at my door 3 days later, and he wasn't alone. Crystal was with him, along with 2 men I didn't recognize. Big, intimidating, clearly there to cause fear. But Crystal stayed in the car, refusing to even get out of the vehicle. "Where are my children?" Marcus shouted through the door. "You have no right to keep them away from me." I had already instructed Emma and Jake about what to do if Daddy showed up. They were hidden in the back room with headphones, watching cartoons, while Mrs. Henderson had discreetly called the police from her apartment. "Marcus, you abandoned these children a month ago," I shouted back. "You can't just show up and demand them back." "I didn't abandon anyone. I was solving our financial situation, arranging a better place for all of us to live." His hypocrisy made me see red. Solving financial situation at the Bellagio? Living in 5-star hotels while your children were malnourished and traumatized? There was silence on the other side of the door. Then Crystal shouted from the car, "Look here, you meddling bitch. These children are interfering with our life. Marcus and I have plans, and these brats aren't part of them." "Crystal, shut up," Marcus hissed. But she continued shouting, "No, Marcus, I'm tired of this charade. You said you were going to make her assume total responsibility for them, that you would find a way to keep the benefits without having to deal with the children. My blood froze. They were really planning to force me to accept permanent custody, while Marcus continued profiting from the benefits. What kind of deal do you have in mind, Marcus? I asked, trying to keep Crystal talking. The kind where you stop meddling and accept the situation. One of the men spoke. Look, lady, Marcus is the legal father. He can put these children anywhere he wants. You should be grateful he's letting them stay with you instead of sending them to an orphanage. That's when I heard the most terrible sound of my life. Emma screaming from the room. She had heard familiar voices and was terrified. Please don't take me back, she cried. Sarah, don't let them take me. Something inside me broke. I opened the door all at once, facing Marcus eye to eye for the first time in months. Did you hear that? I screamed. Your own daughter is begging not to go back with you. What kind of father are you? Marcus looked different, thinner, with bloodshot eyes, a nervous energy that made me suspect he was using drugs. You turned her against me, he accused. You filled her head with lies. Lies? She arrived here malnourished, with bruises, traumatized. Jake could barely speak. Children get hurt, Sarah. Children are difficult. You'll learn that when you assume total responsibility for them. His cruelty hit me. Assume total responsibility? What are you talking about? Marcus smiled sinisterly. Simple. You're going to file for legal custody. You'll assume all responsibilities, all expenses, everything. But I maintain my parental rights and can visit them whenever I want. And why would I do that? Because the alternative is me putting them in an orphanage today. You choose, Sarah. Either you become their official caregiver or they go into the system. That's when Crystal got out of the car, clearly frustrated. Marcus, stop beating around the bush. Either she agrees to take care of these brats forever or we take them now and you'll never see them again. It's that simple. Emma and Jake came running out of the room, hiding behind me. Daddy, please, don't take us, Emma begged. We'll be good, we promise. The pain in her voice must have touched something in Marcus, because for a moment he seemed to hesitate. But then Crystal spoke again. Marcus, remember what we talked about. If she doesn't agree to assume legal custody, we simply disappear with the children. You keep receiving the benefits and never have to worry about them again. That's when I realized the complete and horrible truth. Marcus didn't want the children back. He wanted to blackmail me into assuming legal responsibility while he maintained control and profit. And it was at that moment that the police finally arrived. Officer Martinez was the first to enter, followed by 3 other police officers. The scene must have seemed surreal. Marcus and 2 big men intimidating a woman, 2 small children crying, Crystal screaming about parental rights. Everyone with their hands where I can see them, Officer Martinez ordered. Marcus immediately tried to play the victim. Officer, thank you for coming. My sister is preventing me from seeing my children. I just want to resolve this situation in the best way for everyone. That's not true, Emma screamed, running to the policeman. Daddy wants Sarah to take care of us forever. But he still wants to receive money for us. Officer Martinez crouched down to Emma's level. Calm down, princess. No one is going to hurt you. Can you tell me what you heard? With courage that impressed me, Emma repeated exactly what Crystal had said about Marcus wanting me to assume legal custody while he maintained benefits and parental rights. Jake, hugging my leg, nodded vigorously. Crystal exploded. She's lying. She's just a confused child. Confused about what? The officer asked. About you planning to abandon these children while continuing to profit from them? That's when one of the men who was with Marcus tried to leave discreetly. Officer Williams intercepted him at the door. Where do you think you're going? He asked, searching the man. ID. The man identified himself as Danny Reeves, an acquaintance of Crystal's who had been hired only to intimidate, in case I didn't cooperate. His partner, Mike Torres, admitted the same thing when questioned. Marcus turned pale when he realized his friends were quickly distancing themselves from the situation. I didn't know you guys were going to use intimidation, he lied. Crystal told me you were just going to talk to her. Talk? Officer Martinez laughed dryly. Sir, bringing men to intimidate a woman alone with 2 small children isn't talking. It was at that moment that Crystal made the fatal mistake. Seeing that Marcus was trying to distance himself from her, she exploded. You knew, Marcus. You said you didn't care what happened, as long as Sarah stopped interfering with our plans and assumed total responsibility for these brats. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus tried to deny it, but the damage was done. Mrs. Henderson, who had filmed part of the conversation from her window, handed the police a clear recording of Crystal admitting the blackmail scheme. Marcus Thompson, Officer Martinez said, taking out handcuffs. You're under arrest for child abandonment, government benefit fraud, and attempted coercion. While Marcus was being handcuffed, he looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Sarah. I'm still their legal father. You're going to regret destroying our family. Our family? I screamed back. You were planning to blackmail me into taking care of your children while you continued profiting from them. Emma and Jake hugged me, trembling, while they watched their father being taken away. Crystal was also arrested, screaming that it was all my fault and that Marcus was a victim of circumstances. They can't arrest me. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted Marcus to get rid of those noisy brats, she yelled while being put in the police car. After everyone left, I sat on the floor of my living room with the 2 children in my lap. Is Daddy coming back? Jake asked with his little voice. Not for a very long time, sweetheart. Daddy did very bad things, so he's going to stay away to learn to be a better person. Emma lifted her face to look at me. Sarah, now you're our real mommy? The question hit me like lightning. Technically, I still didn't have legal rights over these children. Marcus was still their father, even imprisoned. And Jennifer, although Emma's biological mother, had no rights over Jake. We're going to figure this out together, I promised. But one thing I can guarantee, you'll never go through something like this again. That night, after the children fell asleep, I received a call from Detective Williams. Sarah, there are more things you need to know about your brother. The investigation revealed that the situation is even worse than we thought. My heart stopped. What did you discover? Marcus wasn't just collecting fraudulent benefits for Emma and Jake. He was doing this in 3 different states using false identities. He collected more than $80,000 in the last 2 years, all based on the lie that he was raising children alone. $80,000? And there's more. Remember Rebecca, the mother of his 3rd child? We discovered that Marcus forged documents to get a $20,000 loan using the child as a dependent, a baby he abandoned when he was 3 months old. The enormity of my brother's crimes was becoming clear. How many people did he deceive? At least 5 different women, 7 children in total, and 3 states. Sarah, your brother is a professional criminal. He uses relationships and children as a business. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the children Marcus had hurt, about all the lies he had told, about all the times he used his charm to manipulate people who trusted him. But I also thought about Emma and Jake, sleeping peacefully in the next room, finally safe. And I made a decision that would change our lives forever. The next 2 months were an intense legal battle. Jennifer hired the best custody lawyer she could find while I worked with a lawyer specialized in adoption, Mrs. Patterson. The case is complex, Mrs. Patterson explained during our first meeting. Marcus still has parental rights, even imprisoned. But the evidence of abandonment and fraud works in our favor. What does this mean for the children? It means you need to prove that Marcus is permanently inadequate as a father, not just temporarily. And for Jake, you need to show that placing him with Jennifer would be in his best interest, even without biological connection. Fortunately, we had abundant evidence. Detective Williams had discovered that Marcus owed more than $100,000 in gambling debts. He had used false identities to get loans, had collected fraudulent benefits in 3 different states, and had a clear pattern of abandoning children when responsibility became inconvenient. Dr. Martinez did complete psychological evaluations of Emma and Jake. The results were heartbreaking, but also provided crucial evidence. Emma shows clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, he explained. Nightmares, separation anxiety, fear of abandonment. Jake has significant delay in speech development and social skills, probably due to trauma and prolonged neglect. But he also had good news. Both children showed dramatic improvement in the last 8 weeks. Emma gained weight, is sleeping better, and started demonstrating age-appropriate behaviors. Jake is talking more and showing developmental milestones that were delayed. What caused this change? Stability, consistent care, adequate nutrition, and a safe environment. Sarah, you literally saved these children. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Marcus appeared handcuffed, wearing an orange prison uniform. He had lost even more weight and looked sick, probably due to drug and alcohol withdrawal. Jennifer was there, sitting next to me, holding my hand while we waited. She had spent the last weeks reconnecting with Emma, and it was beautiful to see the bond between mother and daughter gradually rebuilding. When Emma was called to testify, I held my breath. The judge, a gentleman named Judge Harrison, crouched down to her level. Emma, do you know why we're here? She nodded seriously. To decide where me and Jake are going to live forever. And where would you like to live? With Sarah and Mommy Jenny, she said without hesitation. They love us. They give us food every time we're hungry and don't scream at us when we ask questions. Do you want to live with your daddy? Emma looked at Marcus, who tried to smile at her. But instead of running to him, she shrank and hid behind the judge's chair. Daddy did bad things, she said quietly. He left us alone many times. And Crystal screamed that we were too noisy. I don't want to go back there. Emma, do you remember being hungry when you lived with Daddy? She nodded vigorously. Sometimes there was no food in the house. Daddy said I was big and could take care of Jake, but I didn't know how to make food. Jake cried a lot when he was hungry. Judge Harrison asked a few more gentle questions, all painting a devastating picture of neglect and abandonment. When it was Jake's turn, he simply hid behind me and refused to talk to anyone, except to whisper, "I want to stay with Sarah," when the judge asked where he would like to live. Marcus finally had his chance to speak. He tried to portray himself as a father who had made mistakes, but who was changing his life and learning to be better. Judge Harrison, I admit I made mistakes, but these are my children. I love them and they need their father. Sarah did a wonderful job taking care of them temporarily, but a father cannot be replaced. Mr. Thompson, Judge Harrison said coldly, you abandoned these children for 2 months, collected fraudulent benefits using them as dependents while they lived with someone else, and tried to blackmail your sister into assuming legal custody while you maintained control. How do you explain this? Marcus tried to deflect blame. I was going through a difficult period, Your Honor. Crystal made me believe the children would be better off with Sarah temporarily. I never wanted to abandon them permanently. Then why did you try to force your sister to assume legal custody while you maintained parental rights? Marcus stuttered, clearly not expecting this direct question. I thought it would be better for the children to have legal stability, but I still wanted to be part of their lives. While continuing to collect benefits based on the lie that you were caring for them? Marcus's silence was deafening. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, in 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a clear case of calculated abandonment and exploitation of minors. You not only neglected your parental responsibilities, but actively profited from that negligence. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. Marcus tried to protest, but Judge Harrison raised his hand to silence him. Based on the evidence presented, including the children's testimony, medical documentation of neglect, evidence of benefit fraud, and the established pattern of abandonment, this court permanently terminates Marcus Thompson's parental rights over Emma and Jake Thompson. The gavel struck, and I felt as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Emma and Jake were finally safe. 2 years later, our life had completely transformed. Jennifer got full custody of Emma, and I officially adopted Jake. But the most important thing was that the children remained together as siblings. We bought houses on the same block so Emma and Jake could see each other every day. Mrs. Henderson moved to an apartment next to my house. She had become the official grandmother the children never had. Emma was flourishing at school. She had recovered all the lost weight and was at the appropriate reading level for her age. More importantly, she was smiling again. Not just polite smiles, but genuine laughter of a happy child. Jake had made even more dramatic progress. With speech therapy and lots of love, he now spoke in complete sentences and was even starting to tell silly jokes that made Emma laugh. His nightmares had stopped, and he no longer flinched when voices were raised. "Mommy Sarah," Jake said one morning, while we ate pancakes at breakfast. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "I almost don't remember how it was before. Have you always been here?" My heart broke and healed at the same time. "No, my love, but I'll always be here from now on." Emma, who was visiting for the weekend, looked up from her plate. "Sarah, do you regret helping us? I know your life became very different because of us." I held her face in my hands. "Emma, sweetheart, you didn't change my life. You made it complete. I don't regret anything." And it was true. Yes, my life had changed drastically. Yes, I had lost freedoms that single people in their 20s have. But looking at these 2 children, who were now truly my children, I knew I had made the right decision. Marcus was still in prison, serving a 5-year sentence for benefit fraud and child abandonment. Crystal had been deported after they discovered she was in the country illegally and had helped Marcus with the frauds. Neither had tried to contact us. Jennifer and I became more than allies. We became true friends and co-mothers. We worked together to give the children the stability and love they deserved. One afternoon, while we watched Emma and Jake playing in the yard, they were building a pillow fort and laughing like children should laugh. Jennifer turned to me. "Sarah, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Do you ever think about how your life would be if Marcus had never called that night?" I thought for a moment, watching Jake teach Emma how to stack cushions. Sometimes. But then I look at them and realize this was always the life I was supposed to have. Marcus thought he was using me as a free babysitter, but actually, he gave me the greatest gifts of my life. How so? He taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who you choose to love and protect. He showed me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. And most importantly, he brought me Emma and Jake. Jennifer smiled, tears in her eyes. You know they saved you as much as you saved them, right? She was right. Before Emma and Jake, I was just existing, working, paying bills, going through the motions of adult life. But caring for them gave me purpose, made me grow in ways I never imagined possible. That night, after Jake fell asleep, I sat in his room watching him sleep peacefully. No more nightmares, no more waking up screaming, no more fear that someone would abandon him again. Thank you, I whispered to the universe. Thank you for allowing me to be his mother. Jake moved a little and mumbled in his sleep. I love you, Mommy Sarah. And in that moment, I knew I had won. Marcus had tried to use me, had tried to blackmail me, had tried to turn me into a free babysitter forever. But in the end, he had given me something that all the money in the world couldn't buy. A true family. The price he paid for trying to exploit me was losing his children forever. The price I paid for defending them was gaining unconditional love that would last a lifetime. And when I weighed everything, I knew who had made the better deal. Marcus was right about one thing. Family is forever. He just didn't understand that true family isn't about blood or blackmail or control. It's about love, sacrifice, and being present when the people you love most need you. Emma and Jake taught me that the greatest price you can pay for someone isn't money. It's giving your heart completely, knowing they'll take care of it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. And that was a price I was more than willing to pay. Did you enjoy the story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Until the next story. During dinner, my mother-in-law laughed at me and said that if I disappeared tomorrow, no one would miss me. I'm going to tell you something that might sound familiar, but I promise you, every word is true. My name is Louise, and 8 years ago, I thought I had found my forever. You know that feeling when you meet someone and suddenly the future makes sense? That was me and David. We had this shared vision of building something beautiful together. A home, a family, a life that would make all those romantic movies seem pale in comparison. Those first few years were everything I had dreamed of. We'd spend Saturday mornings planning our future kitchen renovations, arguing playfully about whether to get a golden retriever or a chocolate lab, and lying in bed talking about baby names until we fell asleep laughing. David was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely excited about our shared dreams. We bought our first house together when I was 26 and he was 28. A charming 2-bedroom with a picket fence that needed painting and a garden that begged for someone to care about it. But somewhere around our 5th year together, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small changes that I convinced myself were normal relationship evolution. David started checking his phone more during our conversations. He became less enthusiastic about our weekend projects. When I'd suggest painting the guest room that we'd always planned would become the nursery, he'd find reasons to postpone it. Maybe next month became his favorite phrase. The change was so gradual that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. You know how it is when you're living inside something. You adjust to each small shift until one day you wake up and realize you're in a completely different relationship than the one you started with. That's exactly what happened to us. I remember the exact moment I first felt truly alone in my marriage. We were at Home Depot, looking at paint samples for that guest room we'd been talking about for months. I was excited, holding up different shades of soft yellow and sage green, explaining how we could make it gender neutral but still warm and welcoming. David was standing next to me, but he might as well have been on another planet. When I asked his opinion, he just shrugged and said, "Whatever you think is fine." That phrase, "whatever you think is fine," became the soundtrack of our relationship. It was his response to everything from dinner plans to vacation ideas to major life decisions. At first, I thought he was being supportive, letting me take the lead. But gradually, I realized he wasn't being supportive at all. He was checking out, leaving me to carry the weight of our shared dreams alone, while he slowly backed away from everything we had planned together. Looking back now, I can see that 5th year was when David started building walls I didn't even know existed. But at the time, I just tried harder, thinking that if I could be patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough, we'd find our way back to those Saturday morning conversations about our future. I had no idea that our problems were about to get so much worse, or that the man I thought I married was about to show me exactly who he really was under pressure. If only I had known then what I know now, that some people retreat from love when it gets real. and that all the patience in the world can't change someone who doesn't want to grow up. By year 6, we had officially started trying for a baby. I remember how excited I was the first month we decided to stop using protection. I had visions of surprising David with a positive test, maybe hiding it in his coffee cup or wrapping it up as a little gift. But month after month, my period would arrive right on schedule, and each time felt like a small death of hope. After 8 months of trying naturally, my doctor suggested we run some tests. Nothing major, she assured us, just routine blood work and a few examinations to make sure everything was functioning as it should be. I was nervous but optimistic. David seemed supportive, holding my hand during appointments and asking the right questions. For a moment, it felt like we were a team again. The tests revealed that I had some minor hormonal imbalances that could be affecting ovulation, but nothing that couldn't be treated with medication and monitoring. The doctor was encouraging, explaining that many couples face similar challenges and that with the right treatment, our chances were very good. I left that appointment feeling hopeful for the first time in months. But fertility treatment is not for the faint of heart. The hormone injections made me emotional and physically uncomfortable. I had to go in for blood draws and ultrasounds every few days, tracking my cycle with scientific precision that sucked all the romance out of the process. David started treating our scheduled intimacy like a chore, often sighing heavily or checking the time when I'd tell him the fertility app said it was the right moment. "This doesn't feel natural anymore," he complained one evening after I'd reminded him that we were in our peak window. "It's like we're machines following a schedule." I tried to explain that this was temporary, that once we got pregnant, things would go back to normal. But David seemed to shut down more with each passing month. The man who used to hold me when I cried about negative pregnancy tests started staying late at work during my most emotional days. He'd come home to find me crying over another failed cycle and just pat my shoulder awkwardly before disappearing into his home office. After 18 months of treatments, 3 failed IUI procedures, and countless negative tests, I suggested we take a break and consider IVF. Our doctor had mentioned it as the next logical step, explaining that it would give us better odds and more control over the process. But when I brought it up to David, the conversation changed everything between us. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he said quietly, not even looking at me. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd once planned our future, and he was delivering what felt like a death sentence to our dreams. "This whole process is consuming our entire life. We never talk about anything else. You're always upset about something. Either the medications are making you sick, or you're devastated about another negative test, or you're researching new treatments online until midnight." I stared at him, feeling like he'd slapped me. "You're giving up? Just like that?" "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Maybe we're not meant to have kids. Maybe we should focus on what we do have instead of chasing something that might never happen." But here's what really broke my heart. It wasn't just that David was ready to give up on having children. He was giving up on us. He stopped asking how my appointments went. He stopped pretending to care when I got excited about a new treatment option. He even stopped touching me except for the scheduled times. And even then, he seemed like he was just going through the motions. I found myself facing not just infertility, but the crushing realization that the man I'd married wasn't willing to fight for our dreams when things got difficult. While I was pushing through the physical and emotional toll of treatment, hoping we'd come out stronger on the other side, David was already mentally checking out of our marriage. The worst part was the silence. We stopped talking about the future entirely. That guest room remained unpainted, a constant reminder of the family we weren't building, and the husband who had decided it was too hard to keep trying. Just when I thought our marriage couldn't get more complicated, David's mother called with what she described as a health scare. Patricia, that's David's mom, had been having some dizzy spells, and her doctor wanted to run more tests. She was scared to be alone, she said. And could she possibly stay with us for a few weeks while she figured things out? I should have said no right then and there. My gut told me this was a mistake, but David was already saying, of course, that family comes first, and that we had plenty of room. What could I do? Say no to a sick mother-in-law? So I smiled and agreed, even as every instinct screamed that this was going to be a disaster. Patricia arrived on a Tuesday morning with enough luggage for a month-long vacation. Just the essentials, she explained, directing David to carry in box after box of her belongings. She immediately started rearranging our living room furniture, explaining that the couch wasn't positioned properly for her back problems, and that she'd need the television remote kept nearby because her medications made her tired. Within the first week, I realized that Patricia's health scare seemed to conveniently disappear whenever she wanted to do something she enjoyed. She was too weak to help with dishes, but perfectly fine to spend hours on the phone gossiping with her sister. She couldn't possibly cook for herself, but had the energy to criticize every meal I prepared. "Louise, dear," she'd say with that fake sweet voice that made my skin crawl, "don't you think this chicken is a little dry?" David's father, God rest his soul, always said I made the most tender chicken. Maybe I should show you my secret. David would light up whenever his mother praised her own cooking or offered to help me in the kitchen. He never seemed to notice that her help always came wrapped in criticism, or that she managed to make me feel incompetent in my own home. Instead, he'd encourage her suggestions, saying things like, "Mom always did make amazing chicken," or "maybe you could teach Louise that recipe." The few weeks turned into a month, then 2 months. Every time I gently asked about her health or her timeline for going home, Patricia would suddenly feel dizzy, or mention that her doctor wanted her to avoid stress. David would immediately jump to her defense, reminding me that she was going through a difficult time and that we should be patient. But here's what really started to drive me crazy. Patricia wasn't just staying in our house, she was taking it over. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets because this layout doesn't make any sense. She replaced my bathroom towels with her own because mine were too rough. She even moved the furniture in our bedroom because she could hear David and me talking at night, and it was disturbing her sleep. Every morning, I'd wake up to find something else changed. My coffee maker moved to a different counter. My favorite reading chair pushed into a corner. My decorative pillows replaced with her knitted cushions that smelled like old perfume and mothballs. When I'd mention these changes to David, he'd shrug and say his mother was just trying to be helpful, that I was being too sensitive. The worst part was watching David transform back into a 12-year-old boy whenever his mother was around. He'd ask her permission for everything: what to have for dinner, what to watch on television, whether he should work late or come home early. He started deferring to her opinion on everything from our finances to our weekend plans. I felt like a stranger in my own home, married to a man who seemed more interested in pleasing his mother than supporting his wife. And Patricia? She was just getting started. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes every time David chose her comfort over mine, every time he agreed with her criticism of me, every time he failed to defend our marriage against her subtle but constant attacks. 3 months into what was supposed to be a few weeks' stay, I realized I wasn't just dealing with an extended house guest. I was living with a woman who had no intention of leaving, and a husband who was perfectly happy to let his mother run our lives. By month 4, I had completely lost control of my own home. Patricia wasn't just staying with us anymore, she was running the show. She had taken over the kitchen entirely, declaring that she needed to be on a special diet for her health, and that meant controlling all our meals. She'd wake up early to start cooking, filling the house with the smell of overly salted food and vegetables boiled until they were colorless mush. "Louise, sweetie," she'd say when I'd try to cook something for myself, "you really shouldn't be eating so much processed food. No wonder you're having trouble getting pregnant. A woman's body needs proper nutrition." Then she'd launch into a lecture about fertility and diet that somehow always ended with her explaining how quickly she'd gotten pregnant with David. She had opinions about everything. My job was too stressful for a woman trying to conceive. My clothes were too tight and probably affecting my circulation. My housekeeping wasn't thorough enough. She'd run her finger along surfaces and tusk disapprovingly at dust I couldn't even see. She even criticized the way I folded laundry, insisting that David's shirts needed to be done a specific way to avoid wrinkles. The most infuriating part was watching David's response to all of this. Instead of the partner I'd married, I was living with a man who acted like he was still living in his childhood bedroom. Every morning, Patricia would ask him what he wanted for breakfast, and he'd actually consider the options like he was ordering from a menu. She'd pack his lunch in a paper bag with his name written on it in her careful handwriting, and he'd thank her with a kiss on the cheek like he was 10 years old heading off to school. When I'd try to talk to David about boundaries, he'd get defensive immediately. "She's just trying to help, Louise. She feels useful when she can take care of us. It's not hurting anything." But it was hurting everything. I couldn't have friends over because Patricia would hover and make comments about their appearance or their life choices. I couldn't relax in my own living room because she'd positioned herself as the permanent occupant of her chair, complete with a TV tray table covered in her medications, reading glasses, and tissues. I couldn't even have a private conversation with my husband because she had an uncanny ability to appear whenever we were talking, usually with some urgent need that required David's immediate attention. The breaking point came when I discovered she'd been going through our mail. I caught her sitting at the kitchen table with our bank statements spread out in front of her, making notes in a little notebook. "Patricia, what are you doing with our financial information?" She didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, I was just trying to help you organize your bills, dear." David mentioned that you've been stressed about money with all those medical treatments, and I thought I could help you budget better. You know, when David was young, I managed every penny of our household finances. I'm quite good at finding ways to save money. When I told David about this invasion of privacy, he actually defended her. She's just trying to help Louise. Maybe we could use some financial advice right now. Mom's always been good with money. That's when I realized I wasn't just married to David anymore. I was married to David and Patricia, and in that marriage, I was definitely the third wheel. Every decision went through her. Every plan had to consider her needs and preferences. Every conversation somehow became about what Patricia thought or what Patricia needed or what Patricia remembered from when David was younger. I started spending more time at work, staying late just to avoid coming home to a house that no longer felt like mine. I'd sit in my car in the driveway sometimes, steeling myself to walk into my own front door and face whatever new way Patricia had rearranged or criticized or taken over while I was gone. David noticed my absence, but interpreted it all wrong. Mom mentioned that you seem unhappy lately, he said one evening. Maybe you should talk to someone. She thinks all the stress from the fertility treatments might be affecting your mood. Even my emotional state was now being filtered through Patricia's interpretation and presented to my husband as her concern for my well-being. I was living in some bizarre alternate reality where my mother-in-law had more influence over my marriage than I did, and my husband thought that was perfectly normal. 6 months into Patricia's temporary stay, I found myself sitting in a divorce lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon, using my lunch break to explore options I never thought I'd need to consider. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Ms. Rodriguez, listened patiently as I explained my situation. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Your husband has essentially moved his mother into your marital home indefinitely. She's taken control of household decisions, and he consistently chooses her comfort over your reasonable requests for boundaries." When she put it like that, it sounded even worse than I thought. I nodded, feeling embarrassed by how clearly dysfunctional my marriage had become. "Mrs. Chen, I've seen this before. Some men never really leave their mother's house emotionally, even when they physically move out. The question is whether your husband is willing to recognize the problem and change, or if he's already made his choice about who comes first in his life." Driving home that day, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. David had made his choice, hadn't he? Every time Patricia criticized me and he stayed silent, he was choosing her. Every time she took over some aspect of our home and he praised her for being helpful, he was choosing her. Every time I asked for support and he told me I was being too sensitive, he was choosing her. I started paying closer attention to David's behavior, and what I saw made me sick. He wasn't just failing to defend me. He was actively seeking Patricia's approval for everything. Before making any decision, even small ones like what to watch on TV or whether to get takeout for dinner, he'd glance at his mother to gauge her reaction. If she frowned, he'd immediately change course. If she smiled, he'd puff up with pride like a little boy who'd just gotten a gold star. One evening, I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. It had been months since we'd had any alone time, and I thought maybe getting away from Patricia's constant presence might help us reconnect. David seemed interested until his mother overheard our conversation. "Oh, you two go ahead," she said in that martyred tone she'd perfected. "I'll just stay here by myself. Don't worry about me. I'll find something in the refrigerator. I hope I can figure out how to work the microwave without David here to help me." Within minutes, David was backpedaling. "Actually, maybe we should just order pizza and stay home. Mom's not feeling well, and I don't like the idea of leaving her alone." I wanted to scream. Patricia wasn't sick. She was manipulative. But David couldn't see it, or didn't want to see it. He was so eager to be the good son that he'd completely forgotten how to be a husband. That night, I lay in bed listening to David and Patricia talking quietly in the kitchen. She was praising him for being so considerate, telling him what a good son he was, how lucky she was to have raised such a caring boy. And David was eating it up, his voice warm and happy in a way it hadn't been when talking to me in months. I realized I wasn't married to a man at all. I was married to a little boy who was still desperately seeking mommy's approval, and I was just the woman who happened to be sharing his bed. The thought made me feel sick and somehow dirty, like I was participating in something fundamentally wrong. The next day, I called Ms. Rodriguez and set up another appointment. I needed to understand my options because I was starting to realize that this wasn't a temporary problem that would resolve itself once Patricia's health improved. This was who David really was. A man who would never prioritize his wife over his mother, who would never fully commit to building an adult relationship because he was too comfortable being taken care of like a child. I found myself looking at other couples when I was out, wondering how many wives were actually married to grown men versus overgrown boys who'd never learned to choose their own family over their family of origin. I started to understand why some women stayed single rather than settling for a man who couldn't cut the apron strings. The saddest part was remembering the man I thought I'd married. Confident, independent, ready to build a life with me. That man had been an illusion, and Patricia's presence had revealed the truth. David had never really left home. He'd just temporarily moved his dependence to a different address. Now that Mommy was back, he didn't need to pretend to be grown up anymore. The final straw came during David's birthday dinner, 7 months after Patricia's arrival. She had insisted on hosting it at our house, inviting David's entire extended family, his aunt, uncle, 2 cousins, and their spouses. I offered to help with the menu planning and preparation, but Patricia waved me off with a dismissive smile. "Oh no, dear, you just focus on looking pretty. I want everything to be perfect for my son's special day. And you know how particular I am about my cooking." She spent days preparing David's favorite childhood meals, filling our house with relatives who barely acknowledged my presence. I felt like a stranger at my own husband's birthday party, watching Patricia hold court in my dining room, accepting compliments on the decorations she'd chosen and the food she'd prepared in my kitchen. Everything was going wrong, but I was trying to keep the peace. Then Patricia's sister Margaret started asking about children, the way family members always do at gatherings. "So when are we going to see some little ones running around? You two have been married long enough?" I felt my face flush, but before I could respond, Patricia jumped in with her own commentary. "Well, Margaret, some women just aren't naturally maternal. You know, Louise is very focused on her career, and with all the stress she puts on herself, it's no wonder her body isn't cooperating. I keep telling David that maybe they should just accept that some couples aren't meant to have children." The room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could see the mixture of pity and judgment on their faces. But what made it infinitely worse was watching David's reaction. Instead of defending me, instead of shutting down his mother's cruel commentary, he actually nodded along. "Mom's probably right," he said, avoiding my eyes. "We've been trying for a while and Louise gets really stressed about it. Maybe it's just not meant to be." I sat there in stunned silence as Patricia continued, encouraged by David's agreement. And honestly, Louise has never been very good at managing the household anyway. Just last week, I had to reorganize the entire pantry because she had no system at all. Can you imagine trying to raise children in such chaos? Sometimes I think God knows best. David laughed. Actually laughed at his mother's assessment of my failings as a potential mother and wife. His aunt chuckled too, nodding as if this was perfectly reasonable dinner conversation. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to be my family, who were treating my fertility struggles and my competence as sources of entertainment. "Louise is lucky she has me here to help," Patricia continued, really warming up to her audience now. "I don't know how she managed before I moved in. The poor thing was so overwhelmed, trying to work full-time and maintain a house. David was practically living on takeout and wrinkled shirts. More laughter from the family, more agreement from my husband. I felt like I was disappearing, like my entire identity was being erased and rewritten by this woman who had systematically taken over every aspect of my life. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Patricia overstaying her welcome or David being too passive to set boundaries. This was about a fundamental lack of respect for me as a person, as a wife, as a woman deserving of basic dignity. David wasn't just failing to defend me, he was actively participating in my humiliation, using me as a source of bonding material with his mother. I excused myself from the table and went to our bedroom, where I could hear them continuing the conversation without me. They moved on to discussing David's work, his hobbies, his plans for the weekend, everything that apparently mattered, now that the entertainment value of mocking his wife had been exhausted. I sat on the edge of our bed, looking at this room that no longer felt like mine, in this house that had been systematically taken from me, listening to my husband laugh with his family about what a disappointment I was. And I realized that I was done. Not just tired, not just frustrated, not just hopeful that things would eventually get better. I was completely, utterly done with all of it. That night, after the last guest had left and Patricia had finally gone to bed, I waited for David to apologize, to explain, to show some recognition of how badly he'd hurt me. Instead, he thanked me for being such a good sport about his mother's jokes and told me how happy it made him to see his family getting along so well. I knew then that tomorrow would be my last day in this house. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While David was at work and Patricia was at her weekly doctor's appointment, one of the few times she actually left the house. I moved with a purpose I didn't know I still possessed. I packed only what I needed: clothes, important documents, a few personal items that mattered to me. Everything else could stay with the life I was leaving behind. I arranged for a storage unit and a temporary apartment across town, made phone calls to change my address, and withdrew half of our savings. Exactly what I was legally entitled to. The divorce papers were already prepared, signed, and ready. Ms. Rodriguez had advised me to serve them properly, but I had a different plan. This wasn't just about legal proceedings. This was about making a statement that couldn't be misunderstood or minimized. I left the papers on David's pillow, along with a note that I'd rewritten 3 times to get exactly right. Since you already have a woman running your life, you don't need to. I hope you and Patricia are very happy together. Maybe now you can finally move back into your childhood bedroom where you've always belonged. Don't contact me. My lawyer will handle everything from here. I walked through the house one last time, looking at the space that Patricia had systematically transformed to suit her tastes and needs. The furniture arranged for her comfort, the kitchen organized according to her preferences, the decorations she'd chosen to replace mine. David had let her erase me from our home long before I decided to leave. By the time David came home that evening, I was already settled in my temporary apartment, 30 minutes away but feeling like another world entirely. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine, sitting in blessed silence for the first time in 7 months. No one was going to criticize my wine choice, or suggest I shouldn't be drinking because of my fertility issues, or launch into a story about how much better their wine was back in their day. I thought I'd feel sad, or scared, or uncertain about what I was doing. Instead, I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like myself again. Not the diminished, constantly criticized version of myself I'd become, but the woman I used to be before I started accepting scraps of respect from a man who was supposed to love and protect me. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and logistics. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, finding a permanent apartment, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during the months when bringing anyone home meant subjecting them to Patricia's judgment. I started remembering what it felt like to make decisions without having to consider someone else's mother's opinion. My friends were shocked when I told them what had happened. We knew things were difficult, my best friend Lisa said, but we had no idea it was that bad. You seemed so small whenever we saw you those last few months, like you were trying not to take up space. That's exactly what I'd been doing, making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate Patricia's growing presence in my life and David's shrinking respect for our marriage. I'd been disappearing incrementally so gradually that I almost didn't notice until I was barely there at all. 3 weeks after I left, I drove by our old house out of curiosity. Patricia's car was still in the driveway. The garden I'd once cared for was overgrown with weeds. The paint on the front door was chipping. It looked like a house where no one was taking care of things, which, I realized, was probably accurate. David had his mother to take care of him, but who was taking care of the adult responsibilities he'd been avoiding? I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt sorry for the woman I used to be, who had convinced herself that love meant accepting less and less until there was almost nothing left. I felt proud of the woman I was becoming, who had finally said enough and walked away from a situation that was never going to improve. For the first time in months, I was excited about my future, a future that belonged entirely to me, where my opinions mattered, and my needs were considered, and my dignity was non-negotiable. It felt like coming back to life after a long illness, like remembering who I was before I lost myself in a marriage to a man who never grew up. Living alone for the first time in my adult life was like discovering I had superpowers I never knew existed. I could eat dinner at 10 o'clock at night if I wanted to. I could leave dishes in the sink without someone commenting on my housekeeping standards. I could watch whatever I wanted on television without negotiating or enduring passive-aggressive sighs about my choices. The silence was intoxicating. No one was analyzing my every move, criticizing my decisions, or offering unwanted advice about how I should be living my life. I started remembering what it felt like to trust my own judgment, to make choices based on what I wanted, rather than what would avoid conflict or criticism. I redecorated my new apartment exactly the way I'd always wanted our house to look. Bright colors, plants everywhere, art that made me happy instead of tasteful neutrals that offended no one. I hung photos of my friends and family, bought books that interested me, and filled my space with things that reflected who I actually was, rather than who someone else thought I should be. The most amazing discovery was how competent I actually was when no one was constantly undermining my confidence. I handled the divorce proceedings efficiently, managed my finances without Patricia's helpful oversight, and even learned to fix a few things around the apartment that would have required David's immediate consultation with his mother in our old life. I started going out with friends again, accepting invitations I would have declined before, because bringing anyone home meant subjecting them to Patricia's judgment and David's awkward attempts to please everyone simultaneously. My social life came back to life, and I realized how isolated I'd become during those months of walking on eggshells in my own home. Work became more fulfilling too. Without the constant stress of going home to conflict and criticism, I had energy to focus on projects I'd been neglecting. My colleagues noticed the change, commenting that I seemed more confident and engaged. I even got promoted to a position I'd been hoping for but hadn't felt ready to pursue while my personal life was in chaos. But the biggest change was internal. I stopped second-guessing myself constantly. I stopped mentally rehearsing conversations to avoid triggering someone's disapproval. I stopped making myself smaller to make others more comfortable. I remembered what it felt like to take up space unapologetically, to have opinions without immediately doubting them, to exist without constantly seeking approval. Dating wasn't even on my radar yet, but I found myself noticing things about other relationships that I'd never paid attention to before. I watched couples in restaurants and grocery stores, observing the dynamics between them. Some women looked exhausted, constantly managing their partner's moods and needs. Others looked confident and secure, comfortable in partnerships where both people seemed to respect each other. I realized I'd never had the second kind of relationship with David, even in our best times. There had always been an undercurrent of me working to earn his attention and approval, of managing his emotions and making things easy for him. I'd mistaken that emotional labor for love, thinking that's what wives were supposed to do. Now I understood the difference between a partnership and a caretaking arrangement. I'd been David's emotional manager, trying to keep him happy and comfortable while neglecting my own needs. When Patricia arrived, she simply took over that role, and David seamlessly transferred his dependence from me to her without ever learning to depend on himself. 6 months after leaving, I barely recognized the woman I'd been during the final year of my marriage. That woman had been anxious, defensive, constantly trying to prove her worth to people who had already decided she was lacking. This woman, the one I was becoming, was calm, decisive, and completely uninterested in anyone's approval except her own. I wasn't bitter about David or even angry at Patricia anymore. They were perfect for each other. He needed someone to make all his decisions and manage his emotional life, and she needed someone to control and fuss over. I had been the obstacle to their perfect codependent relationship, and removing myself had probably made both of them happier. The revelation was liberating. I didn't have to fix David or teach him to be an adult. I didn't have to prove my worth to Patricia or win some imaginary competition for his loyalty. I could simply be myself, a complete, capable woman who didn't need anyone else's approval to feel valuable. Friends started commenting on how different I seemed. "You're glowing," my colleague Sarah said during lunch one day. "There's something lighter about you, like you're not carrying some invisible weight anymore." She was right. I had been carrying the weight of constantly trying to earn love and respect that should have been freely given. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me, without elaborate explanations or apologies. I stopped over-explaining my choices or seeking validation for my decisions. I discovered that I actually had excellent instincts when I trusted them instead of constantly doubting myself to avoid conflict. The woman I was becoming wouldn't have tolerated Patricia's behavior for 7 days, let alone 7 months. She wouldn't have married a man who needed his mother's permission to make adult decisions. She wouldn't have spent years trying to love someone into maturity. But I didn't regret being that woman for a while. She had taught me exactly what I never wanted to accept again. 8 months after I left, I was trying to recover some old photos from a cloud account I'd forgotten about when I accidentally opened an email folder I thought I'd deleted. What I found there made me sit down hard in my kitchen chair, staring at my laptop screen in disbelief. There were 47 emails from David, starting just 3 days after I'd left. The first few were angry, demanding that I come home immediately and stop this ridiculous tantrum. He accused me of being selfish and dramatic, of abandoning our marriage over minor disagreements about his mother's visit. But as I scrolled through the messages, watching the timestamps span across months, I'd been blissfully unaware of his attempts to contact me. The tone changed dramatically. By week 3, the anger had shifted to confusion. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Mom says she was only trying to help, and I thought we were handling everything fine." Month 2 brought the first hints of desperation. "Louise, please just call me back. Let's talk about this like adults. I know we can work things out if you'll just come home and we can discuss this rationally." He was still framing it as my problem to solve, my responsibility to return and fix what I had broken by leaving. But somewhere around month 4, something shifted. I've been thinking about what you said in your note, and maybe I haven't been seeing things clearly. Could we at least meet for coffee? I miss talking to you. For the first time, he sounded less certain that I was the one who needed to change. The emails from months 5 and 6 were harder to read. David had apparently started therapy, something I'd suggested years earlier that he'd dismissed as unnecessary. My therapist helped me understand some things about boundaries and family dynamics. I think I owe you an apology, but I want to give it to you in person. By month 7, he was writing things I'd waited years to hear. I asked Mom to move back to her own place. It wasn't easy, and she's not happy with me, but I realize now that I should have done it months ago. I should have protected our marriage instead of making you feel like an outsider in your own home. The most recent emails from just 2 weeks ago were almost heartbreaking in their honesty. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I finally understand what I lost. I wasn't being a husband to you. I was still being a son first, and that wasn't fair to either of us. I've been learning to make decisions without asking for Mom's opinion, and it's scary but also liberating. I sat there reading message after message of David apparently becoming the man I'd always hoped he could be, but only after I'd left him. He wrote about setting boundaries with Patricia, about realizing how much he'd depended on both of us to manage his emotional life, about understanding why I'd felt so alone in our marriage. I keep wanting to call you when something good happens at work, or when I figure out how to fix something around the house by myself, or when I stand up to Mom about something. I want to tell you that I'm learning to be the kind of man who deserves a partner like you, but I know it's too late for us. The last email, sent just 5 days ago, was the shortest and somehow the most devastating. I signed the divorce papers today. I hope you're happy, Louise. I really mean that. You deserve to be happy, and I'm sorry it took losing you for me to grow up. I'll always love you. I closed the laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the life I'd built without him. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd been right that David could change, that he could learn to be an independent adult. But I'd also been right that it would only happen if I stopped enabling his immaturity by accepting it. The timing felt cruel. Here was evidence that David had finally done the work I'd begged him to do for years, had finally prioritized our marriage over his mother's comfort, had finally started becoming the partner I'd needed him to be, and it had only happened after I'd given up and walked away. But as I sat with those feelings, I realized something important. The fact that David could change didn't mean I owed him the chance to prove it to me. The fact that he'd finally grown up didn't erase the years of feeling invisible and unimportant in my own marriage. The fact that he missed me now didn't obligate me to return to a relationship that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. I felt sad for both of us, for the timing, for the lost years, for the woman I'd been who had tried so hard to love someone into maturity. But I didn't feel regret about leaving. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and some growth only happens when comfortable situations become uncomfortable enough to force change. I couldn't stop thinking about those emails, so I did something I probably shouldn't have. I read them all again, more carefully this time. The progression was even clearer on the second reading. David's journey from anger to self-awareness was documented in painful detail across 8 months of messages I'd never seen. In month 3, he'd written about Patricia finally going home, but framed it as her decision. Mom decided she was feeling better and wanted to get back to her own routine. By month 5, he was more honest. I had to ask Mom to leave. She wasn't happy about it, and she's been calling every day to complain about how ungrateful I am. But I'm starting to understand why you felt so unwelcome in our own house. The financial struggles he mentioned were eye-opening. Without me contributing to household expenses and without Patricia managing everything, David had apparently struggled to keep up with basic responsibilities. I never realized how much you handled that I just took for granted. The bills, the scheduling, the planning. I thought it all just happened automatically. He wrote about therapy sessions where his counselor helped him recognize patterns he'd never noticed. Dr. Martinez asked me to describe a typical conversation between you, me, and Mom. And when I said it out loud, I could hear how often I asked for Mom's opinion instead of discussing things with you. I could hear how I'd dismiss your concerns by saying you were being too sensitive instead of actually listening to what you were telling me. The most revealing emails were about his relationship with Patricia after I left. Mom keeps asking when you're coming back, and when I tell her we're getting divorced, she says it's probably for the best because you were never right for me anyway. Hearing her say that made me realize she was never trying to help our marriage. She was trying to prove that no woman could take care of me like she can. He described setting boundaries that I'd begged him to establish years earlier. I told Mom she can't just drop by without calling first, and she cried and said I was choosing strangers over family. It took me this long to understand that choosing my wife over my mother isn't betraying family. It's creating my own family. David had apparently gone through our old photo albums and found pictures from our early years together. I was looking at photos from our first apartment, and I could see how happy you looked. Then I found pictures from the last 2 years, and your smile looks forced in every single one. I did that to you. I let Mom do that to you. I'm so sorry. Louise. The emails revealed other changes too. He'd started cooking for himself, learning to do laundry properly, managing his own schedule without Patricia's input. Yesterday, I made a decision about refinancing the house without asking anyone's opinion, and then I realized it was the first major choice I've made independently in years. It felt terrifying and amazing at the same time. But the most heartbreaking part was reading about his loneliness and regret. I thought having Mom around made me feel loved and supported, but really it just made me feel like a child. Being alone in this house is hard, but it's also teaching me to be comfortable with my own company. I never learned that before. I always needed someone taking care of me. In his most recent emails, David wrote about understanding why I'd had to leave so dramatically instead of trying to work things out gradually. Dr. Martinez explained that some people only change when the consequences become impossible to ignore. You tried to talk to me for years, but I kept minimizing your concerns because I could. You had to show me what losing you actually meant before I'd take it seriously. He'd apparently had several difficult conversations with Patricia about boundaries and respect. Mom finally admitted that she never thought you were good enough for me, and that she was trying to prove you couldn't handle being a wife and mother. She said she was protecting me from making a mistake. I told her that the only mistake I made was not protecting you from her. Reading about David's growth should have made me happy. It meant I'd been right about his potential. Right, that he could become the partner I'd needed him to be. But instead, it made me incredibly sad. All of this self-awareness, all of this emotional maturity, all of these changes I desperately wanted, they'd only come after I'd given up and left. The timing felt like the cruelest irony. Here was proof that David could learn and grow and change, but only after he'd lost the person who'd believed in his potential the most. He'd become the man I'd always known he could be. But for someone else's future, not for our marriage. A year and 2 months after I'd left, I was grocery shopping in my new neighborhood when I ran into Tom, a colleague of David's from his old job. I'd always liked Tom. He was one of the few people from David's work life who'd treated me like an individual rather than just David's wife. Louise, I thought that was you, he said, approaching my cart with a surprised smile. How are you doing? You look great. I thanked him, and we chatted briefly about work and life. Then, inevitably, he asked about David. I heard you guys separated. I'm sorry. I always thought you two seemed happy together. We're divorced now, I said simply. It was the right decision for both of us. Tom nodded, looking a bit uncomfortable. Well, he's having a rough time. I saw him a few weeks ago at a coffee shop downtown, and he looked pretty rough around the edges. I wasn't sure if I should say anything to you. After Tom left, I couldn't shake the image of David looking rough around the edges. Despite everything, I didn't want him to be suffering. I wanted him to be okay, to have learned from our marriage and moved on to build something healthier with someone else. 3 days later, I got my answer about Tom's comment. I was coming home from work when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the steps of my apartment building. David looked up as I approached, and Tom hadn't been exaggerating. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Hi, Louise. His voice was quiet, uncertain. I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to see you. Just once. I stood there holding my work bag, looking at this man I'd been married to for 8 years, feeling like I was seeing a stranger. How did you find where I live? Tom mentioned he'd seen you in this neighborhood. I know it's wrong to just show up like this, but you changed your number and blocked me on social media. I needed to apologize in person. I could have told him to leave. I should have told him to leave. Instead, I found myself sitting down on the steps next to him, maintaining careful distance between us. You have 10 minutes. David took a shaky breath. I read your note again yesterday, the one you left with the divorce papers. About me already having a woman running my life. You were right. I wasn't married to you. I was still married to my mother, and I expected you to just accept being the other woman in my own marriage. He talked about therapy, about the painful process of recognizing how he'd failed as a husband. He told me about Patricia's angry reaction when he'd finally set boundaries, how she'd accused him of being ungrateful and weak. She said you'd brainwashed me against my own family. It took me 6 months to realize that standing up for my wife against anyone, even my mother, isn't betrayal. It's what husbands are supposed to do. David, I interrupted gently, I'm glad you've learned these things. I really am. But I know it's too late, he said quickly. I know I destroyed something that can't be fixed. I'm not here to ask you to come back. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I lost and why you had to leave the way you did. We sat in silence for a moment. Then David pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. These are the final divorce papers. I signed them. I also wanted to give you this. He handed me a check. It's your half of the house equity. I sold it last month. I looked at the check, surprised by the amount. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. You put just as much into that house as I did, even though only my name was on the deed. That was another way I failed you, making you feel like a guest in your own home. He stood up slowly. I won't bother you again, Louise. I just wanted you to know that losing you taught me how to be the kind of man who might deserve love someday. Maybe not yours, but someone's. As he walked away, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and closure. This was the David I'd always believed existed underneath the boy who'd never learned to choose his wife over his mother. But seeing him now, mature and self-aware and finally taking responsibility for his choices, only confirmed that I'd made the right decision in leaving. Some people can only learn through loss. Some growth only happens when the comfortable option disappears. David had become the man I'd always hoped he could be, but only after he'd lost the woman who'd believed in that potential the most. 2 years after I left David, I'm sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a Sunday morning, reading a book and enjoying the kind of peaceful weekend that once seemed impossible. The woman I am now barely recognizes the woman who used to tiptoe around her own house, constantly managing other people's emotions and needs while neglecting her own. I never did remarry, though I dated someone wonderful for about 8 months. Marcus was everything David hadn't been: confident without being arrogant, independent without being distant, respectful of my boundaries and opinions. But when he started talking about moving in together, I realized I wasn't ready to risk my hard-won peace for anyone, no matter how great they seemed. Maybe someday I'll be ready for that kind of partnership again, but for now, I'm completely content with the life I've built for myself. My career flourished once I stopped pouring all my emotional energy into a marriage that was draining me. I got 2 more promotions and now manage a team of 12 people. My colleagues often comment on my calm confidence and decision-making skills, qualities that were always there but had been buried under years of second-guessing myself to avoid conflict at home. I bought my own house 6 months ago, using David's equity payment as a down payment. It's smaller than our old house, but perfect for me. Lots of windows, a garden where I grow vegetables and flowers, and every single thing in it chosen because I love it, not because it won't offend anyone. I host dinner parties for my friends, travel when I want to, and make decisions based entirely on what feels right to me. As for David, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he eventually started dating someone new, a teacher named Rachel who apparently has no patience for his mother's interference. Tom mentioned that Patricia tried her usual tactics with Rachel, but Rachel shut them down immediately, and David actually supported her. It's like he finally learned to be a husband, Tom said, sounding surprised. I'm genuinely happy for David. He needed to learn those lessons, and I'm glad he found someone who benefited from the growth that came too late for our marriage. But I also know that his transformation only happened because I left. If I'd stayed, if I'd continued to accept his mother's dominance and his emotional immaturity, nothing would have changed. Some people only grow when their comfortable patterns become impossible to maintain. Patricia, according to the same mutual friends, was furious about losing her control over David's life. She apparently told everyone who would listen that I'd turned her son against his own family, never acknowledging that David had simply learned to prioritize his wife over his mother, something most men figure out before they get married. She tried the same manipulative tactics with Rachel that she'd used with me, but found herself dealing with someone who had clear boundaries from day one. The most important thing I learned from my marriage and divorce is that love isn't enough if it's not paired with respect, maturity, and genuine partnership. I'd spent years thinking that if I just loved David enough, if I was patient enough and understanding enough, he'd eventually become the husband I needed him to be. But you can't love someone into growing up. They have to want to do that work themselves. I also learned that leaving doesn't make you a quitter. Sometimes it makes you a woman who finally understands her own worth. There's a difference between fighting for a relationship and fighting for scraps of respect from someone who's shown you repeatedly that you're not their priority. I fought for 8 years, and when I finally stopped fighting and started walking, everything in my life got better. To any woman reading this who recognizes herself in my story, you deserve to be someone's first choice, not their consolation prize. You deserve a partner who protects your relationship from outside interference, who considers your feelings and decisions, who makes you feel valued rather than tolerated. You deserve to feel at home in your own life. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to want more. Don't stay in situations that require you to make yourself smaller to keep the peace. Don't accept that's just how he is as an excuse for behavior that hurts you. And don't let anyone convince you that your standards are too high when all you're asking for is basic respect and consideration. Some relationships can be saved with communication and compromise. Others need to end so everyone involved can learn to be better versions of themselves. The key is knowing the difference and having the courage to act on that knowledge even when it's terrifying. I'm not bitter about those 8 years with David. They taught me what I need in a relationship and what I'll never accept again. They showed me that I'm stronger than I thought and more capable of independence than I'd ever imagined. They led me to this life I've built, where every day belongs to me and every choice reflects my values and desires. That's not settling for less. That's finally understanding that I was always enough, exactly as I am.